Welcome to Shady Oaks, the kind of neighborhood where the grass is measured with a ruler and the silence is mandatory after 9:00 p.m. If you've ever wondered where Karens go when they retire from complaining at department stores, this is the place. It's a sprawl of beige houses and perfectly manicured hedges that look like they were trimmed with surgical scissors. From the outside, it looks like a suburban paradise. From the inside, it feels like a high-security prison where the guards are 60-year-old women in golf carts. I was the community systems manager, which is a fancy way of saying I was the only person under 60 who knew how to program the main gate, the security grid, and the automated billing software. For 5 years, I was a ghost in the machine. While everyone else was arguing over which shade of eggshell was acceptable for a mailbox, I was the one making sure the neighborhood actually functioned. I managed the fiber optic network that kept their smart fridges running and the complex database that tracked every single guest vehicle that entered the gates. It wasn't just a job, it was a delicate ecosystem. The board of directors at Shady Oaks loved technology, but they didn't understand it. To them, the cloud was just something that occasionally blocked the sun during their tennis matches. This ignorance was my greatest shield, but it was also my greatest frustration. Enter Brenda. Brenda is the HOA President, a woman who treats her position like she's the supreme leader of a small nation. She doesn't just want the community to look good, she wants total control over the lives of everyone within its borders. Brenda is the type of person who considers a slightly chipped mailbox a federal offense and thinks a stray cat is an invasive species that requires a full board meeting. She's famous for her drive-bys, where she cruises around in her customized white golf cart, squinting at people's lawns and scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal she calls the violation ledger. I worked directly under Brenda, which meant I was the target of her constant low-level atmospheric pressure. She would call me at 2:00 a.m. because her porch light wouldn't dim via her app, or she'd demand I pull security footage to see if a neighbor's dog had looked at her roses aggressively. She treated me like a personal servant rather than a professional, but I took it. I took it because the pay was decent, and I genuinely liked the challenge of maintaining such a complex system. I built the entire back-end infrastructure from scratch, integrating the gate sensors, the billing API, and the security cameras into one centralized hub that I could control from my phone. The problem with being indispensable is that people start to take your presence for granted. They forget that the machine only hums because someone is constantly oiling the gears. Over the last 3 years, I hadn't taken a single day off, not for Christmas, not for my birthday, and certainly not for a vacation. Brenda's standard response to any time-off request was that the community was in a critical phase. Every month was a critical phase. In the spring, it was the irrigation rollout. In the summer, it was the pool access upgrades. In the fall, it was the security audit. By the time my brother announced his wedding in Hawaii, I was at my breaking point. I had been staring at the same 4 walls of the clubhouse office for 36 months. I was burnt out, cynical, and tired of being Brenda's digital punching bag. I knew that asking for a week off would be like asking for a kidney, but this was my brother. It was a non-negotiable family milestone. I prepared my request, documented every single system status to show that everything was stable, and even set up a series of automated scripts to handle routine maintenance while I was gone. I had planned for every technical contingency. What I hadn't planned for was the sheer, unadulterated ego of a woman who thought she owned the very air I breathed. I walked into Brenda's office on a Tuesday morning, the air smelling of lavender oil and overpriced stationery. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of the end. I was about to find out exactly how much Shady Oaks valued my loyalty, and Brenda was about to find out what happens when you cut the power to the person who holds the only flashlight in the dark. I didn't realize that my simple request for a week of sunshine was about to trigger a total neighborhood meltdown that would leave the board in ruins and Brenda's reputation in the gutter. But before we get to the chaos, you need to understand exactly how I set the trap without even meaning to. I walked into the clubhouse office with my formal leave request tucked into a neat blue folder. I had done my homework. I had cross-referenced the community calendar to make sure I wasn't missing a board meeting or a major maintenance window. I even wrote a 5-page manual for the temporary emergency contact they could hire if a server rack decided to commit suicide while I was away. I was being more than reasonable. I was being professional. But Brenda didn't value professionalism. She valued subservience. She was sitting behind her mahogany desk, which was positioned in a way that forced you to squint against the sunlight reflecting off her Volunteer of the Year trophies. She didn't even look up when I tapped on the doorframe. She was busy using a gold-plated stylus to highlight names on a list, likely her naughty list of residents who had the audacity to use the wrong shade of mulch. I stood there for a full minute, the silence stretching uncomfortably, before I finally cleared my throat and laid the folder on her desk. "Brenda, I'm putting in my formal request for leave," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "It's for my brother's wedding in Hawaii. I'll be gone for 7 days starting the 14th of next month." The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brenda stopped her highlighting mid-stroke. She slowly lifted her head, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose like a predator sizing up a meal. She didn't look at the folder. She looked at me as if I had just suggested we turn the community pool into a swamp. "Next month?" she asked, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "You mean during the smart landscaping transition, the week we are migrating the entire irrigation database to the new sensors?" "I've already automated the migration scripts, Brenda," I explained, gesturing toward the folder. "I've spent the last 3 weeks prepping the system. It's a set-it-and-forget-it situation. The sensors will calibrate themselves and I'll be checking the logs remotely once a day just to be sure. It's all in the plan." She finally opened the folder, but she didn't read it. She flipped through the pages with the disdain of someone looking at a grocery store circular. She sighed, a long, dramatic sound that was meant to convey how much of a burden I was being. "We don't do remote, Alex. This community pays for a physical presence. What if a gate arm snaps? What if the billing portal glitches and Mrs. Higgins gets a late fee she doesn't deserve? Do you expect me to crawl into the server room and fix it?" "If a gate arm snaps, the mechanical team handles it," I countered. "And the billing portal hasn't glitched in 3 years because I built it to be redundant. I haven't taken a single day off in 3 years, Brenda. Not one. I'm the best man. I'm not asking for permission. I'm giving you a professional courtesy notice." That was the spark. Brenda didn't like being told she wasn't the one in control. She stood up, her chair screeching against the hardwood floor. She leaned over the desk, her face inches from mine. "Let me be very clear with you. Shady Oaks is a premium community. We do not pause for weddings. Your family's social life is not a priority for this board. If you aren't at your desk on Monday morning the 14th, I will consider it a voluntary resignation. No severance, no payout for unused hours, and I'll make sure the board knows you abandoned your post during a critical infrastructure upgrade." I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see a formidable boss. I saw a small, insecure woman who was terrified of a world she couldn't control without a manual. She thought she was calling my bluff. She thought that because I had been so reliable, I was also trapped. She believed that the paycheck she authorized every 2 weeks was a leash that allowed her to own my time, my family milestones, and my dignity. "I'm going to that wedding, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Then don't bother coming back," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger toward the door. "I'll have a replacement found before your plane even touches down in Honolulu. There are 1,000 IT kids who would kill for this salary. You aren't as special as you think you are." I picked up my folder, tucked it back under my arm, and walked out. I didn't argue, I didn't plead. As I walked past the main gate on my way to my car, I looked up at the high-definition 4K camera I had installed last summer. I thought about the security certificates, the encrypted handshakes, and the complex web of code that kept this entire golden cage functioning. Brenda thought I was just an employee she could replace like a light bulb. She had no idea that I was the only thing holding the darkness at bay. I went home, booked my flights, and started a silent countdown in the back of my head. Brenda had drawn a line in the sand, but she didn't realize she had drawn it right in front of a digital tidal wave. The flight to Honolulu was 11 hours of pure, unadulterated bliss. I spent the journey watching movies and sipping ginger ale, refusing to pay for the in-flight Wi-Fi. For the first time in years, I wasn't monitoring a server heartbeat or checking the latency on a security gate. I was just a guy going to his brother's wedding. When I finally landed and stepped out into the humid, floral-scented air of Hawaii, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I checked into my hotel, changed into a floral shirt, and headed to the rehearsal dinner. It wasn't until I sat down with a drink in my hand that I decided to turn my phone back on. The vibration didn't stop for nearly 2 minutes. It felt like a frantic insect dying in my palm. My notifications were a chaotic blur of red bubbles and bold text. There were 24 missed calls from the clubhouse, 12 from Brenda's personal cell, and a string of emails that got progressively more hostile as the day went on. The final email, timestamped at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, was the official one. It was a formal letter from the HOA HR portal, CCing the entire board. The subject line read, "Immediate termination of contract, job abandonment." The body of the email was pure Brenda. It stated that due to my unauthorized absence and failure to report to my station during a critical system migration, my employment was terminated effective immediately. It went on to list the consequences. My final paycheck would be withheld pending a full audit of the systems, my access to the clubhouse was revoked, and my health insurance would be cut off by the end of the day. Brenda had even added a personal PS at the bottom that said, "I hope the wedding was worth the career suicide. We've already contacted a local firm to take over your duties tomorrow morning. Don't bother reaching out to any board members." I leaned back in my chair watching the sunset over the Pacific, and I started to laugh. My brother came over looking concerned and asked if everything was okay. I told him everything was better than okay, it was perfect. Brenda thought she had won. She thought that by firing me for cause, she had saved the HOA a few $1,000s in payout and asserted her dominance. She really believed that IT work was like mowing a lawn, that she could just hire a new kid, and they could pick up the mower and keep going. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't just a worker, I was the entire infrastructure. Over the years, to save the community money on expensive enterprise software, I had built a custom middleware system. It was a beautiful, complex bridge that allowed the cheap gate hardware to talk to the billing software and the security cameras to sync with the resident database. Because it was a custom build, I hosted the security certificates on my personal developer account. Every 48 hours, the Shady Oak server would send a handshake request to my private cloud to verify the license and update the encryption keys. If that handshake failed, the system didn't just stop working, it went into safe mode. And in the world of high-end gated communities, safe mode is a very interesting state of being. It's designed to prioritize life safety over property security. That meant the gates would default to open so emergency vehicles could get in, but the administrative backend, the part Brenda used to track violations and issue fines, would lock down tighter than a drum to protect resident data. I looked at the clock. It was currently 7:00 p.m. in Hawaii, which meant it was midnight back in Shady Oaks. The last successful handshake had happened just before I boarded my flight. The next one was scheduled for 48 hours from then. Brenda had fired me on a Monday. By Wednesday morning, the kill switch I had never intended to use would activate itself simply because I was no longer there to authorize the renewal. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't call the vice president to plead for my job. I didn't even send a snarky text back to Brenda. I simply deleted the HOA's remote access app from my phone, blocked Brenda's number, and ordered another round of drinks for the table. I was officially a tourist, and Shady Oaks was no longer my problem. I knew that within 36 hours, the beige walls of Brenda's kingdom were going to start crumbling, and she wouldn't have a single person to call for help. The silence from my end wasn't just a choice, it was a countdown. Tuesday in Hawaii was a day of snorkeling and family brunches, but back in the humid suburbs of the mainland, the clock was ticking down on Brenda's sanity. While I was floating over coral reefs, the Shady Oak server was sitting in its air-conditioned closet in the clubhouse, sending out digital pings into the void. Each ping was a request for a security handshake, a little hello to my private developer cloud to ensure everything was authorized. And each time, the response was a cold, hard silence. I knew the rhythm of that server better than I knew my own heartbeat. It was a Linux-based system I'd nicknamed the Warden. I had configured it to be incredibly robust, but I had also built it with a specific failsafe protocol. In the tech world, we call this dead man's documentation. It wasn't that I had planted a virus or a malicious kill switch to be petty. Rather, it was a matter of licensing and liability. Since I was using my personal professional licenses to keep the HOA's costs down, those licenses were tied to my active status. The moment my employment was terminated and my corporate credentials were deleted from the HR portal, the automated link between the community and my private server began to dissolve. Brenda, of course, knew none of this. To her, IT was a utility like water or electricity. It was just supposed to be there. She spent Tuesday morning gloating. I found out later from a friendly neighbor that she had spent the day parading a young, terrified-looking tech consultant around the clubhouse. This kid was likely a nephew of one of her bridge partners, hired for $20 an hour to replace a professional engineer. She probably told him it was an easy job, just checking boxes and keeping the computer happy. What she didn't realize was that the system was currently in its grace period. It's the digital equivalent of a person holding their breath. The gates were still working, the cameras were still recording, and the billing portal was still active. But every hour that passed without my manual authorization code brought the system closer to its expiration. It's a standard security feature for high-end gated communities. If the administrator is kidnapped or the system is hacked, it locks down to prevent a total data breach. By Tuesday night, the server entered yellow alert. This triggered a series of automated warning emails sent directly to the administrator's inbox, which used to be mine, but Brenda had redirected all my mail to her own account the moment she fired me. She likely saw the technical warnings about SSL certificate expiry and API handshake failure and tossed them into the trash folder, thinking they were just spam or more of my unnecessary technical jargon. She was so blinded by the power trip of firing me that she couldn't see the digital structural beams of her kingdom starting to splinter. The beauty of the kill switch was its absolute impartiality. It didn't care about Brenda's ego and it didn't care about the board's budget. It only cared about the protocol. At exactly 4:00 a.m. on Wednesday, the 48-hour window would slam shut. When the sun rose on Shady Oaks that morning, the smart landscaping system, the one Brenda refused to let me miss for the wedding, was scheduled to perform its first major high-pressure test. I sat on my hotel balcony on Tuesday night looking out at the dark Pacific. I checked my personal server logs one last time. I saw the final warning ping from Shady Oaks. It was like a flare sent up from a sinking ship. I could have fixed it with 3 keystrokes. I could have renewed the certificate and kept the golden cage running smoothly for another month. But then I remembered the look on Brenda's face when she told me my family wasn't a priority. I remembered the email telling me my health insurance was gone. I closed my laptop. I didn't click renew. I didn't click authorize. I simply logged out. The warden was on its own now. In a few hours, the failsafe would trigger and the community of Shady Oaks would learn the hard way that you don't fire the person who holds the only map through the labyrinth. I went to bed and slept the sleep of the truly liberated while 3,000 miles away, a silent digital countdown hit 0. Wednesday morning in Shady Oaks usually began with the soft whir of electric golf carts and the distant, rhythmic thud of tennis balls. But at 4:00 a.m. the digital heart of the community stopped beating. When the server missed its final handshake, the warden protocol didn't just crash, it executed its primary directive: protect the infrastructure. In a high-security environment, if the system can't verify its administrator, it assumes the worst: a physical breach or a total system takeover. The first sign of the apocalypse was the front gate. To ensure that residents weren't trapped inside and emergency services weren't blocked out during a system failure, the massive wrought iron gates swung into the fail-open position. They didn't just open, they locked there, their hydraulic arms hissing as they surrendered. For the first time in 20 years, the gated part of Shady Oaks was gone. Anyone with a car and a curiosity could drive right into the heart of Brenda's private fortress. But the real chaos started at 10:00 a.m. This was the exact moment the smart landscaping system was supposed to debut. Brenda had insisted on this specific window because the Shady Oaks Garden Club was hosting its annual Blooms and Bubbles brunch on the clubhouse lawn. The town's social elite were all there, dressed in linen suits and floral sundresses, sipping mimosas and celebrating Brenda's visionary leadership. Because the server was in safe mode, it lost the ability to read the moisture sensors in the soil. The system's default backup for a sensor failure: run the irrigation at 100% capacity to prevent the expensive imported sod from dying. Without a human at the helm to override the schedule, every single high-pressure sprinkler head on the common grounds erupted simultaneously. It wasn't a gentle mist, it was a deluge. Thousands of gallons of reclaimed lake water, which, let's be honest, smells faintly of algae and fish, blasted into the air. The Blooms and Bubbles brunch became mud and mayhem in approximately 6 seconds. The expensive catering tents collapsed under the weight of the sudden downpour. Hand-painted invitations turned to pulp. Brenda's signature silk hat, a centerpiece of the event, was flattened against her head like a wet pancake. I was 3 hours behind on Hawaii time, just waking up to a series of frantic texts from a neighbor named Dave. Dave was a retired engineer who always appreciated my work. His first text was just a photo of the front gate standing wide open with a Pizza Hut delivery car driving through. His second text was a video of the clubhouse lawn. Even through the grainy footage, I could hear the screaming. People were scrambling for cover as the sprinklers hammered the brunch tables. By 11:00 a.m., the safe mode reached the administrative wing. The digital locks on the clubhouse office, the one Brenda had so triumphantly changed the physical keys for, engaged their electronic deadbolts. Brenda, dripping wet and smelling like pond water, tried to retreat into her office to call for help, only to find that her keycard was invalid. The system didn't recognize her as an authorized user because her credentials had never been properly synced to the master encrypted database I controlled. She was literally locked out of her own kingdom, standing on the sidewalk in a ruined outfit, while the front gates allowed a steady stream of curious onlookers to drive in and witness her humiliation. My phone started vibrating again. It wasn't just emails now, it was a barrage of calls from the clubhouse main line. I didn't answer. I sat on my balcony watching the real waves of the Pacific and imagined the digital waves crashing over Brenda. I could see the system logs on my tablet. The new tech consultant she had hired was trying to force a reboot. I watched as he unsuccessfully entered admin and password 123 over and over again. Every failed attempt triggered a 30-minute lockout. The community was now a rudderless ship. No security, no privacy, and a landscape that was rapidly turning into a swamp. Brenda had told me that the community didn't pause for weddings. She was right, it didn't pause, it imploded. As the sun climbed higher in Hawaii, I realized that part 5 of Brenda's plan, replacing me, had failed before the first mimosa was poured. She had the title, she had the gavel, and she had the golf cart. But I had the code, and without it, she was just a wet woman screaming at a locked door. By Thursday morning, the tropical sun in Hawaii was glowing, but back at Shady Oaks, the atmosphere was radioactive. I spent my morning at a quiet cafe sipping Kona coffee and finally deciding to unblock Brenda's number. I didn't even have to wait 5 minutes. My phone lit up with an incoming call that practically vibrated off the table. I took a slow sip of my coffee, waited for the 6th ring, and then slid the bar to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice as smooth and relaxed as a calm sea. "Alex, where the hell have you been?" Brenda's voice didn't just come through the speaker, it exploded out of it. She sounded like she had been screaming for 48 hours straight, her vocal cords frayed to a rasp. In the background, I could hear a cacophony of chaos, the shrill beep of a fire alarm, low battery warning, and what sounded like several people arguing about a flooded basement. "I'm on vacation, Brenda," I replied calmly. "You know, the one we discussed, the one for my brother's wedding. Although, according to my email, I'm actually unemployed, so technically I'm just a private citizen enjoying the beach." "Listen to me, you little..." She caught herself, breathing heavily. I could almost see her vein throbbing in her forehead. "The gates are stuck open, the clubhouse is locked. The irrigation system has turned the south lawn into a peat bog, and the board is threatening to hold me personally liable for the property damage. You did something to the computer, fix it. Right now, I'm ordering you to fix it." I leaned back, watching a surfer catch a wave. "Brenda, let's clear up a few things. First, you fired me, you revoked my access and cancelled my benefits. I don't work for Shady Oaks, and I certainly don't take orders from you. Second, I didn't do anything. The system is performing exactly how it was designed to. It's a high-security failsafe. It requires a licensed administrator to verify the integrity of the network every 48 hours. Since you terminated the administrator, the system naturally assumed the network was compromised and went into lockdown to protect resident data." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her processing the fact that she couldn't bully her way out of a software protocol. "Fine," she spat out. "What do you want? I'll have the bookkeeper send you a check for the hours you worked on Monday. Just give the password to the new consultant we hired." I actually laughed out loud at that. The kid who tried to log in as admin 42 times yesterday. "No, Brenda, that's not how this works. My proprietary middleware is licensed to me, not the HOA. You were paying for my service as part of my employment. Now that the employment has ended, the license has expired. If you want me to bring the system back online, I'm no longer an employee. I'm an independent consultant." "How much?" she hissed. "My emergency consulting fee is $500 an hour," I said, enjoying every syllable. "I require a 10-hour minimum retainer paid up front via wire transfer. I also require a formal written retraction of my termination for job abandonment sent to the entire community, stating that my absence was pre-approved and the system failure was due to administrative error." And Brenda, I want a written apology from you personally, for the disrespect. That's extortion, she screamed. I'll sue you. I'll have you blacklisted from every HOA management firm in the state. You can certainly try, I said, but while you're talking to your lawyers, the gates are wide open, the security cameras are dark, and I'm pretty sure the automated billing system is about to send past due notices to the entire neighborhood because it can't verify the bank tokens. You have 10 minutes to decide. I'm going for a swim and I won't have my phone near the water. I hung up before she could respond. It felt better than any massage or spa treatment I could have bought in Maui. I knew Brenda's ego was her greatest strength, but in this moment it was her noose. She had built her entire identity on being the law and order president of Shady Oaks. Now she was the woman who had literally broken the neighborhood. 10 minutes later my phone chimed. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from my banking app. A wire transfer for $5,000 had just cleared. The negotiation was over. Brenda had blinked, but the apology, that was the part I was really looking forward to. The wire transfer was the white flag, but the apology letter was the killing blow. I spent Thursday afternoon watching the Shady Oaks community portal from my tablet. Usually this site was a graveyard of lost cat flyers and complaints about trash bins being left out too long. Now it was a digital battlefield. Residents were posting photos of the flooded clubhouse and venting about the open-door policy at the front gate. The prestige of the neighborhood was evaporating in real time. At 4:00 p.m. a community-wide email blast went out. It wasn't written by Brenda. It was from the vice president of the board, a retired colonel named Miller who usually stayed out of the drama. The email was blunt. It stated that due to unforeseen administrative complications and a misunderstanding regarding personnel leave, the community systems had entered a failsafe mode. It formally retracted my termination, categorized my absence as pre-authorized professional leave, and this was the chef's kiss, offered a public apology for the unnecessary disruption of community harmony. Attached to the email was a scanned PDF. It was a handwritten note from Brenda. It was short, shaky, and clearly written under extreme duress. It simply read, I apologize to Alex for the misunderstanding regarding the Hawaii leave. My actions were hasty and did not reflect the best interests of Shady Oaks. I didn't immediately fix the system. I waited another hour. I wanted that letter to marinate. I wanted every resident in the 300 homes of Shady Oaks to read it, reread it, and realize that their fearless leader had been brought to her knees by a 30-year-old with a laptop. While I was waiting, my neighbor spy Dave sent me a frantic update. He told me that an emergency board meeting had been called at the clubhouse. Since the electronic locks were still jammed shut, the meeting was being held on the patio, right next to the muddy disaster of the Blooms and Bubbles brunch. Brenda was reportedly standing in the center of a circle of furious homeowners, trying to explain why the gates were open and why the tech kid she hired had accidentally wiped the backup drives in his attempt to bypass my encryption. The kid had made things infinitely worse. In his desperation to impress Brenda, he had tried to force a hardware reset on the main controller. All that did was trigger the anti-tamper protocol, which locked the database behind a 24-character master key that existed only in my password manager. The board members, who were mostly concerned with their property values, realized that Brenda hadn't just made a mistake. She had endangered the entire community's data security and physical safety to win a petty power struggle over a vacation. From what Dave told me, the coup was swift. Colonel Miller stood up and informed Brenda that her aggressive management style had become a liability. He pointed out that because of her personal vendetta, the HOA was now on the hook for a $5,000 emergency consulting fee, thousands in landscaping repairs, and potential lawsuits from the catering company. The board took a vote right there on the patio, under the shadow of the useless security cameras. It was 4-1. Brenda was stripped of her presidency and her seat on the board. She was demoted to a regular resident, a civilian, effective immediately. She reportedly turned a shade of red that matched the hibiscus flowers in the swampy garden and stormed off toward her golf cart, only to realize that the golf cart's electronic charging dock was also tied to the dead server. She had to walk home. I sat back, finished my drink, and opened my laptop. I didn't need to be in the office. I didn't even need to be on the same continent. I logged into my secure terminal, entered the master key, and sent the system restore command. On my screen, I watched the status lights across Shady Oaks turn from red to green, the gates hissed shut, the security cameras flickered back to life, the irrigation valves snapped closed, finally ending the artificial monsoon. I sent one final email to the board, CCing Brenda's personal account. It said, "Systems restored, retainer balance $0. Please note that I am still on vacation until Monday. For any further issues, my hourly rate remains active." I then closed the lid of my laptop and went to my brother's wedding rehearsal, knowing that the golden cage was back under control, but the person who used to hold the whip was now just another prisoner. The rest of the wedding was a blur of tropical flowers, laughter, and the kind of genuine family connection that Brenda had tried so hard to diminish. I stood at my brother's side as his best man, my phone tucked away in a locker, completely disconnected from the suburban drama 3,000 miles away. When I finally flew back to the mainland on Monday, I didn't feel the usual Sunday scaries. I felt like a man returning to a kingdom he had successfully dismantled and rebuilt on his own terms. As I drove through the front gates of Shady Oaks, the warden system recognized my vehicle's RFID tag. The gates didn't just open, they seemed to salute. The neighborhood looked different. The south lawn was still a bit soggy, and there were brown patches where the reclaimed lake water had been a bit too aggressive with the delicate flora, but the silence was back. It was that expensive, curated silence that the residents paid so much to maintain. I went to the clubhouse to pick up my personal belongings. I expected a fight, but what I found was a ghost town. The office that once smelled of Brenda's lavender perfume now smelled like stale coffee and old paper. Colonel Miller was sitting behind the desk. He looked tired, but he looked me in the eye with a newfound respect. He didn't ask me to sit down, he stood up to shake my hand. "The apology stands, Alex," Miller said, sliding a final check across the desk for my remaining accrued vacation time, a payout Brenda had sworn I'd never see. The board had a long talk. We realized we let Brenda run this place like a private fiefdom because it was easier for us to look the other way. We didn't understand the technical debt we were accruing or the personal debt we owed to the people who actually keep this place standing. He offered me the job back officially, not just as a systems manager, but as the director of infrastructure, with a significant raise and a contract that explicitly forbade any board member from interfering with my scheduled leave. I looked around the room at the monitors showing the perfectly functioning gates and the secure, humming servers. It was a tempting offer. I knew this system better than anyone. But I also knew that once you see behind the curtain of a perfect community, the magic never quite comes back. "I appreciate the offer, Colonel," I said, tucking the check into my pocket, "but I've decided to start my own consulting firm. Shady Oaks can be my first client, but I'll be working remotely, and my rates will be the ones we discussed during the negotiation. I think it's better for everyone if I'm not a permanent fixture in the clubhouse." Miller nodded. He knew I had the leverage. He knew that the kid Brenda hired had left a trail of digital destruction that would take months to fully audit, and I was the only one who could do it. We signed a service-level agreement right there, and I walked out of that office a free man for the second time in a week. As I walked to my car, I saw the white golf cart. It was parked in front of a modest house 3 blocks down. Brenda was outside. She wasn't wearing a silk hat or a designer suit. She was wearing a pair of yellow rubber gloves and was on her hands and knees in her front garden, manually pulling weeds. Without her presidency, she had no one to delegate to, and apparently the new landscaping crew was forgetting to prioritize her property. She looked up as I drove by. For a second, our eyes met. There was no screaming, no demands, and no violation ledger in sight. I didn't gloat, I didn't honk, I just gave her a polite, professional nod, the kind of nod you give a stranger you'll never see again. I tapped a button on my dashboard and the community's exit gate swung open with perfect, silent precision. The moral of the story is simple. In the modern world, the person who understands the how is just as important as the person who owns the what. Brenda thought she held the power because she had the title, but she didn't realize that in a world built on code and connectivity, the person holding the kill switch is the one who actually decides when the lights stay on. I drove out of Shady Oaks and didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I had a new business to start, and for the first time in 5 years, I was the one writing the rules. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.